All right. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Lucas, and I am a proud member of the Sacramento Democratic Socialists of America. I'm so excited to see you all here tonight, which it's going to be a very engaging, insightful, and inspiring conversation about the teacher strike wave and the power of workers. Here with me tonight is Red State Revolt author and DSA member Eric Blanc, as well, as well as SCTA and DSA Sacramento member Lori Jablonski. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction on the role of socialists and DSA in particular in these strikes before I pass it off to Eric and Lori. So basically this wave started back in 2012 with the Union Reform Caucus Core, or Caucus of Rank and File Educators in the Chicago Teachers Union, and then it went to the red states of West Virginia and Arizona, all the way to these so-called blue cities like Los Angeles, Oakland, and Sacramento. And all across these waves, teachers are standing up against systemic inequality, austerity politics, and the billionaire-backed movement to destroy public education. Here in California, Democratic Socialists have walked picket lines with striking teachers in LA, Oakland, Sacramento, and most recently New Haven to demand the full funding of our public school system. No matter where you go in California or who sits on the local school board, every school feels the impact of an appalling lack of investment in education. California is the wealthiest state in the wealthiest country in the world, and there is no excuse for underfunding public education. Schools across the state are being forced to do more with less. And in order to change that, it's going to take a mass movement. Democratic Socialists believe that our state can afford to provide tuition-free, high-quality, democratically controlled education from pre-K to college to every Californian, and quite frankly, Democratic Socialists believe that should extend to everyone across the country and across the world. But because wealthy elites control our economy and our government, it's going to take a mass movement of teachers, students, and ordinary working people to win the education system we all deserve. One last thing I want to touch on is the fact that teacher power is working class power. Teachers have tremendous leverage in society, as all workers do. When we get fed up, organize with our coworkers, and stop working, our schools, factories, and offices stop working too. And we can force major concessions from our bosses, whether they are CEOs or state officials. Strikes and other mass labor actions can win more than just better wages and working conditions for a specific set of workers. It's thanks to workers organizing that we have the weekend and the 8-hour day. Workers and teachers in particular have the power to win gains that benefit the common good. As the Chicago teachers' often repeated slogan goes, teachers' working conditions are students' learning conditions. This strike wave is about more than just our education system. It's about the unacceptable lack of investment in public services and the intolerable living conditions this forces on millions of Americans. With the teacher strike wave and the rising popularity of Democratic Socialist politicians like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and their demands for a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, and tuition-free college, we can say for certain that our movement is growing. Working people all over the country are fed up and looking to change their circumstances. Whether on the picket line, at the ballot box, or in the streets, working people are standing up and fighting back. And thank you, teachers, for showing us how it's done. So with that, I will pass it over to Eric.
Cool.
Yes.
How are you all doing? How are you all doing? Let's check it out a little bit. So my name is Eric. I am from San Francisco, nice being back in California. I just got here an hour ago, so it's kind of been intense. What I want to do tonight is two things. First, get you as excited as possible about the teacher strike wave that's continuing to spread across the country, talk about its significance. And then the second is to try to lay out like 4 of the big lessons that I think that we as educators or as activists or socialists can take to spread the movement and hopefully keep on winning wherever we may be. So yeah, just a little bit of background. I had been a teacher in the Bay Area, and then I've spent the last year and a half basically covering every one of the teacher strikes that's happened since West Virginia. And so the talk is based, and then the book I wrote is based on that. And I always forget to plug it, but I will plug it because I'm actually donating all of the proceeds on my end to a strike fund for teachers, so you can get the copy afterwards and I'll sign it if you're interested. So with no further ado, I will subject you, as a former teacher, I'm going to subject you to some of my teacherly ways. So I have some graphs for you. And for those who sat in back, you reap what you sow. If you can't see it, hopefully you should be able to. So this first graph is the total number of educators that went on strike in recent years. So you can see, going back 1992, it would look the same if you took it back further. This dramatic increase, right? Almost 400,000 teachers and really school workers in general. It wasn't just teachers, it was cafeteria workers, custodians, secretaries, bus drivers went on strike in 2018. So that doesn't even include the recent strikes in 2019 like Los Angeles, Denver, Oakland, etc. So this is a really big deal. It's a historic transformation that we're seeing at this moment. The next graph here is a graph that a lot of people haven't seen, and it's the average size of strikes in 2018. So this goes back to 1945, but again, it would look similar if you took it back further. And again, you see it's just this dramatic increase in 2018. Average size of the strikes was the largest in the history of the United States, almost 25,000 workers on average per strike. So for little class participation, why were the strikes so big in 2018? There's no wrong answer. That's not exactly. There's a few wrong answers, but there's some that are less wrong than others. Yes.
So a lot of those teacher strikes, because they have the pay set and the conditions are set statewide. Those are statewide teacher strikes. Teachers are some of the largest groups of unionized employees, and even when you go back to like unionized days over the past, teachers make up a significant part of the workforce in a given state, and so that's a lot of people.
Yeah. So I have a plant in the front. Thank you. Yes. The answer was yes. They were the main. Everything you said is true, but the main one I would highlight is these were statewide strikes. Overwhelmingly in 2018, they were statewide strikes, which is actually very rare for any industry, and it's one of the reasons why they were so big. So it started in West Virginia, then spread to Arizona and Oklahoma, Kentucky, Colorado, North Carolina. And that does have lessons. It's worth. I think it's probably one of the things we're going to have to talk about is, well, what do you do in a state like California, which is almost like its own country, and that poses different challenges. The last graph I want to show you is, it's a little hard to see in the lighting here, but it's the total number of workers on strike. So you can see almost 500,000 in 2018, the largest number of total workers since 1986. But what I think is interesting about this is it breaks it down by industry. So you can see the decline in manufacturing in red, and the increase in purple, which is education. And then the gray area are the other industries. And you can see at the end there, you can see the little tip of the gray area. And so there's two other industries that struck in large numbers in 2018 that I just want to highlight. Do anybody know, what were the other two industries that struck in large numbers in 2018? Because it's worth thinking about the similarities between them and education.
Healthcare?
Yeah, healthcare, so particularly nurses, but healthcare workers generally, and one more?
Airline workers?
No, not airline workers. Anybody? Specifically hotels. Yeah, so hotel workers. And so you have hotel, health, education. And you can think about a lot of similarities there. The one I think is most important to stress from the outset is that these are overwhelmingly female industries. And so you have as a labor movement and a strike wave that's led by women workers right now. It's really exciting and it's new and it's really worth, I think, foregrounding. So, if you go to the next slide, it's just worth taking a step back then and thinking, how much transformation has already taken place. Because sometimes when you live through history, you underestimate the extent to which changes happening in front of your eyes are actually taking place. So just to make this clear, it's worth thinking about the transformation that's happened in the way we talk about the crisis in public schools. So up until recently, this is how it was talked about, which was that, for instance, this is 2004, 2008, Time Magazine, How to Fix America's School. Does anyone know who this is?
Oh, yeah.
That's, sometimes I do this, and sometimes people don't hiss or boo, and they really should. So thank you. This is Michelle Reed. Michelle Reed. Well,
You are one-time governor.
Mayor.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why. Inside, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Well,
She chairs City Hope Charter Schools here in town.
Yes.
my condolences
We
to her.
know who she is.
You know who she is. Okay, so for those who don't, she was the privatizer in chief, in particular of the Washington D.C. public schools. But you already knew that. The next is 2014 Time Magazine, Rotten Apples. It's nearly impossible to fire a bad teacher. some tech millionaires may have found a way to change that. So a really amazing, delightful article worth reading, which, like the discourse in general, is that the fault of the problems in our schools are because of teachers, they're because of unions, and they're because of the inherent inefficiencies of the public sector. So you need to smash unions if you can, you need to bring in charters and vouchers to privatize the schools, and you need to do a lot of accountability, which mostly means forcing students to learn to the test, teachers to teach the test, and then punishing anybody who doesn't follow those rules, right? And that changed, and it changed in a large part because of the teacher strikes in the last year, so much so, yes. Go to the next slide, please. This is the most recent time cover on education. You might have seen it. So I have a master's degree, 16 years of experience, work 2 extra jobs, and donate blood plasma to pay the bills. I am a teacher in America. So the reason you see this transformation was not because the owners of Time magazine gained a moral conscience overnight, which they did not, but was because the teacher strikes were so powerful that they changed the common sense about how we talk about public education in this country. We're talking about 76%, according to the national polls, supported the teacher strikes and their demands, which is just astronomically high. This is a real sea change. And so this is a tremendous political win that's been won. We've won, at least in words, the public argument for the time being. People say now, yeah, the reason schools are in the problem that they are is they're underfunded. You can't keep good teachers because they're underpaid. That argument has been won for the most part, but we haven't yet won the political battle in the sense of making the government actually implement the policies we want. But it sets the precedent for that, which is why it's significant. We got a next slide. The next transformation I think is worth highlighting about the strikes is the transformation of the people themselves who participated in it. I thought that was actually the most moving thing about kind of being on the ground in the strikes, was not even just talking to the organizers, who I like talking to as well, but were the people who had never been to a union meeting, who had never considered themselves political, who oftentimes, even a week or two before the strike, sometimes just days before the strike, thought a strike could never happen, right? Because just they were convinced that everyone was too scared, or that their coworkers wouldn't go out, or that they themselves wouldn't go out. And then oftentimes it was those people who, once the strike began, became the most fiery picket line captains, or got their other coworkers to drive 5 hours to the Capitol every day, right? And that sense of personal empowerment was very hard for people to put into words because it was so moving. A lot of folks I interviewed on the picket lines after, they used almost religious metaphors like awakening or kind of a transformation, because it was very hard to explain the difference of going from feeling very isolated and alone in your day-to-day life and at work to feeling surrounded by 10,000s of your coworkers, right? Feeling like the whole state and the whole country was watching you, and that for the first time, maybe in your whole life, you felt like actually you were changing the outside conditions rather than the other outside conditions just being forced upon you and you having to accept them. And so that's a sense of power that is very hard to take away from people, because once you fight back and win, you want to keep on doing that. And it's one of the reasons why the strikes are spreading still, because if you see workers in one place fight back and win by striking, why not do it as well? And I think that ultimately this is the big political significance of the teacher strike wave, is that it's put the strike back on the table for working people in the United States as a whole, right? One of the main reasons, at least, that our side's been losing, working people have been losing for 4 decades, if not longer, is that our best weapon, the strike, our ability to withhold our labor to force management to listen to our demands, has been dropped. The labor movement is mostly focused on lobbying Democratic politicians instead of doing deep organizing, and we've been losing. And for the first time in a long time, the strike's back on the table, mostly at this point just in education, but there's some evidence that it's at least percolating outwards a little bit. So you can think about how the federal government shutdown ended, right? It wasn't because Pelosi did anything, longest federal government shutdown. What ended was because air traffic controllers on that Friday, where I live in New York now, called in sick, and because the flight attendants union led by Sarah Nelson threatened to strike the next day if Trump didn't end the federal government shutdown. And when they interviewed Sarah Nelson, the president of the union, after they won, they said, "Where did you come up with this crazy idea to a strike to end the federal government shutdown?" It's like, what? Where is this coming from? And she says, "Well, look, if the teachers are doing it, why can't we?" And it's this idea, if the teachers are doing it, why can't we? It's a potentially very explosive and powerful one, and hopefully will continue to spread depending on what we do. So what we do is important, so that's what I want to transition to the second part of the talk, which is what are the 4 big lessons that we can draw. So first big lesson is in order to win, these strikes had to fight not just for the workers themselves who were striking, but really for the community at large. And that made a really big difference. Sometimes people call that social justice unionism, other people call it bargaining for the common good. But the commonality of almost every single one of these strikes was that they fought not just for like better wages and working conditions for teachers, but for things like more funding for students, lower class sizes, a nurse and a counselor in every school, anti-racist demands, particularly in like Los Angeles or Arizona. In the LA strike, they won an end to racial profiling in the school. It's so-called random searches of Black and Muslim students. They got an immigration fund for any family in the district that had to confront ICE. The district would pay for their legal fees, right? And this is something that the teachers union won. And the confluence of these type of big demands were able to bring in the community so that this idea that teachers are actually hurting students by striking, it didn't catch because people saw that actually they were fighting on behalf of working people as a whole. And I think for the labor movement in general, it's something we're going to have to foreground, because one of the main arguments used against us is always, oh, labor is just another special interest looking out for itself, right? And so I think the argument that these strikes have put forward is no, actually the labor movement is on behalf of all working people, and that's why you need to support workers when they go out on strike, because this is how we're all going to win. So that's the first big lesson. The second is the strikes broke the law, and that's one of the reasons why they won. It's important to note kind of from the offset, and this might not be as obvious in California, that this wasn't just an issue in the red state strikes. This picture is from West Virginia where it started. You can see one of the teachers holding a sign, "This was once illegal too," with a sign of Rosa Parks. So there was this identification with the civil rights movement amongst Black and white teachers, because in West Virginia, like in most of the states where there have been strikes, they had to break the law because public sector strikes were illegal. And that wasn't just in places where Republicans were in charge. It's actually only legal in 13 states in our country for public sector workers to strike. So California is actually an anomaly. I live in New York, for instance, and if you're a public sector worker or a teacher, you do not have the right to strike. And in the private sector, there's so many legal barriers to actually effectively organizing or strike, it's almost the same as being illegal, because the whole system is set up legally for us to lose. And so this poses this contradiction, whereas it's almost impossible for us it's very difficult to within the existing system win and like fight back. And then what do? And I don't think we should romanticize breaking the law or striking. In West Virginia, in Arizona, Oklahoma, people were terrified, really, really, really scared, because you can imagine the Republican politicians and some of the Democrats were threatening them with losing their jobs. They were saying, we'll fire you, we'll fine you or fire you. If you go out, you could lose your certification. And people did not take that as threats lightly, because you can imagine if your family depends on your wage to eat or to have a house or to have healthcare, you're not just going to take that risk without thinking about it. Ultimately, though, people did take that risk, and because the argument was made to them and it made sense that if we all go out together, what are they going to be able to do? They're not going to be able to fire us all. And that, in fact, is what ended up happening. They did all go out together, and the Republican politicians that were threatening with all of this stuff didn't end up acting on it because, and I interviewed some of them afterwards, and they acknowledged this, they were worried that if they had tried to throw some teachers in jail or fire them, they would actually spread the support for the teachers, right? It would make martyrs out of them, and they were worried actually that the strikes would spread to the rest of the public sector if they had taken that repressive action. It's true, and they acknowledged that afterwards. So sometimes you do have to break the law in order to win for a righteous cause. And I think that in California, it might be posed a little differently. There's more space. The LA strike didn't have to break the law in order to win. But generally, it's something that we have to pose for the labor movement, even in a place, I would argue, like California at a certain point, because the law here is also quite restrictive. This isn't even a lesson. I just like this slide. So it's a student from Oakland, just during the strike, saying, "I don't like the boss." So it's just a cute class struggle picture. Next, please. The third big lesson is that it took a lot of organizing to make these strikes win. And that's important, because if you might recall, especially when they were first getting described in the media, the way the media talked about the strikes was like this spontaneous explosion. All of a sudden, teachers are rising up, and it's because their pay is low. That was the explanation. And that doesn't really explain that much, because in fact, pay's been low for a very long time, right? And they didn't strike before. It's also lower in certain states in West Virginia or elsewhere, and they haven't had strikes. And in fact, teachers, relatively speaking, compared to most workers in most states, are actually relatively better paid. So it's not just true that the worse your wages are, the more likely you are to strike. There had to be organizers and some, contextual factors to make it so that people not just knew their conditions were bad, because they knew their conditions were bad. We've known it. How many people here are teachers, by the way? Yes, I don't have to tell you, conditions are not good, right? there's a lot of grievances, but in order to act upon those grievances, you need to have a sense of power. And the main thing we're up against at most times is that people don't have a sense of collective power, right? And so organizers were necessary to get that ball rolling. And so in West Virginia, this is Jay O'Neill and Emily Comer. These were the two activists that initiated the West Virginia strike. They first got organized together through the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2015 and 16. They joined Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. They did a study group in the summer of 2017, so 8 months before the strike, of Jane McAlevy's book, No Shortcuts, which is a great book. I recommend you read that instead of my book. It's really good. And they tried their best to implement this perspective of how do you do deep organizing, build power, build strikes. And the problem is they didn't lead their union. They were just rank and file teachers. But they tried their best to do the organizing anyway. They started having one-on-one conversations with their coworkers. They got coworkers at their school and then another district and then across the state to wear red on the same day. They created a Facebook page that ended up going viral. They made silly memes. And I have to say, I was quite skeptical of social media before these strikes as far as like an organizing tool, but now I'm a firm believer in the power of memes. It makes a difference. And they were able to create enough of a groundswell to push their unions into striking. Because the unions in all of these states were like most unions in most of our industries in most parts of the country, that they were primarily oriented, the unions were not toward building power, but to lobbying the Democratic Party. So they had to really get pushed from below to take these actions. And so I think that like West Virginia, but not just West Virginia, shows the organizing. I think for those of us from California, really I would look to Los Angeles in particular as like a more, perhaps like more immediately relevant model, because there, it didn't take them 8 months, it took them 4 years to build for their strike. The radicals won the leadership of their union in 2014, and they spent 4 years building up to the strike that just happened in the early part of 2019. And I think it was the most powerful strike of the whole strike wave so far. It was so deep, they shut down the whole city, they won so much, and they only did that because they had spent so much time preparing and building up workplace leaders and doing the type of very deep organizing that's required to win. So whether it's in a red state or a blue state, the commonality though is that you do need some organizers to get the ball rolling, and what wins is real deep organizing. Last big lesson, the strikes at their most successful challenge this narrative that there's not enough to go around, right? The scarcity narrative that there's just not enough money for good schools, right? And it's important, it's important to note that this was really the main argument that was used against the teachers, right? Because whenever they raised any demands, the response of the politicians was primarily to say, look, there's just not enough money. Even if we wanted to give you this stuff, have you looked at the budget? There's just not enough money for the schools. And what was so important and politically significant about the strikes is that the teachers, the rank and file teachers, and the best unions, they called BS. They said, that's a lie. There's more than enough money in every single one of our states to provide a quality public education for every single student in this state. And the reason that doesn't happen right now is for one reason only, which is that the corporations and the billionaires for decades have been getting tax breaks and have been getting the money that should be going towards our schools, right? And human needs and public services generally. And they were able not just to say that, but they were able to show it with numbers. And they were able to show literally, like in LA or West Virginia, exactly how much in school funding would have been had, could be had, if you reverse the last 5 years of tax cuts for the rich, if you reverse the last 10 years, right? And they were able to say and convince the public that in fact, all of their demands were not only realistic, but urgent, and that the money was there. And that the only reason we didn't have it yet is because the rich haven't been paying their fair share. And I think this is an extremely powerful argument because it raised working people's expectations around education. It wasn't just now, how do you stop cuts from happening, but people started envisioning, oh yeah, what kind of schools do we deserve? Right? That was one of the big slogans, the schools that our students deserve. And that dynamic of workers raising their expectations and fighting for that is extremely dangerous for the people that run our country. Because if you can win good public schools, then why don't workers deserve Medicare for all? Why don't we deserve a Green New Deal? Why don't we deserve an end to the prison industrial complex, right? All of these things that right now seem far-fetched to many people, over the last year, not just because of the strikes, but because of the rise in democratic socialism, now seem more and more realistic. And I think to conclude, this is it's just worth thinking about the particular political moment we're in right now. On the one hand, it's extremely scary because of Trump, the rise of the right, the threat of climate change. But on the other hand, I think one of the real particular things about the moment we're in right now is how exciting it is that there's literally millions of people fighting back and winning. It's important and it's significant. It's the first strike wave in 4 decades is happening as we speak right now. That changes things. It changes how we should expect to organize and like raises our expectations as organizers. Because if you'd asked me in 2017, like where would you not expect a successful statewide strike? I definitely would put Arizona and Oklahoma in the top 3, right? And so if in those types of contexts, you can have literally hundreds of thousands of workers, because it wasn't just the strikers, but it was the students and their parents who participated as well. You have hundreds of thousands of people fight back and win. Then I think for those of us, we really need to, who are activists, we need to realize that at this moment, it's not always the case, but at this moment, people are really, really fed up with the status quo, really fed up with that, right? They're looking for an alternative, and it's up to us to provide that alternative. You have right now the strike wave, you have the rebirth of a socialist movement in the, amazing growth of democratic socialism in America. You have the possibility of electing a democratic socialist to president, Bernie Sanders, not Elizabeth Warren, if there's any confusion. And the combination of these 3 things mean that for the first time in generations, we have the possibility, and I think the responsibility, to rebuild the mass workers movement in this country. And that's very exciting, and I hope a lot of you, if you're not already involved, will get involved to do that. And I look forward to talking with you about how we can do that in Sacramento and across the country afterwards. So thanks for coming out.
Awesome. So now I'm going to pass it off to SCTA and Sacramento DSA's own Lori Jablonski, and if Eric doesn't mind, can I just go back to that cute slide of the kid on the strike for Lori's background?
That's perfect. I like it. Okay. Hi, everybody. Please, yes, read Jane's book, but read this book. Buy it, read it. It's excellent, and it's a good read, and it's a fast read, and it's just very engrossing. So for sure, buy it. So listening to Eric, I decided what I was going to do. I made a bunch of notes. I'm going to talk a couple of minutes about the circumstances in Sacramento in the context of being a very blue city in a very blue state. So this is Red State Revolt. I guess maybe you could say what SAC teachers started doing was the Blue City Revolt. And so I want to spend a little bit of time on that. Eric gets into it a little bit in his book, and I hope maybe we can have a discussion about it. The thing that really resonated for me when I read this and when I just heard you talking again, we have, especially in Sacramento, we have activism and politics that is largely focused on identifying and electing people to office. And if we can't, which is super important, don't get me wrong, it's incredibly important, but we tend to think that if we just get the right person and get them elected, then everything will be okay. And in some cases we've done that. We have found good candidates, good people, and something happens, especially on the school issues. They get onto the Sac City School Board, and what the hell happens? I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. What happens to people? So that really struck a chord with me, and I've been thinking about it since I read it in your book, and that's been our focus, and it have been a focus of SCTA for a long time too. And I think over the past few years, SCTA as a union has taken a different turn, which I'm thrilled about. And that different turn, you could really see as we were bargaining our contract. It was, Scott, you were at every meeting, right? 17-month process?
34 meetings, 18 months long. Each meeting was at least 4 hours, so at least 134 meetings. One woman was pregnant, gave birth, and her child walked before we finished bargaining. So there were 60 of us, and it was just it was truly an amazing experience.
Right.
And I'll let you.
And so that's really important because it was a big turn in the union, and I've been teaching now, this will be my 19th year, and I think I've been a site rep for 15 or 16 years. So I've been involved in SCTA for a long time. I was high school director for a while. So to see it turn in a direction that I was really excited to see that. Those bargaining sessions, and I did not go, but somebody from my school was at virtually every one of those sessions. So what happened is the union embraced kind of open bargaining. And so we had people from almost every school in the district, and we have 80-some schools, participating in bargaining. And that built unity. And so when we went off on strike, and there was, a lot of people were saying a lot of stuff about us, about why were we doing this, how irresponsible it was, how we had broken with the other labor partners in the district, and all of this stuff. You know what, it didn't faze our members because they had been through the 17-month period. If they weren't in those sessions, somebody at their school had been in those sessions. And so they knew what was happening. They knew what the issues were. You were there too on all of them, I think, right? So they knew, yeah. And so that was really important. So I just wanted to highlight that it's a change. It's a different way than we've done things in the past, okay? And so then you said something a few minutes ago that the challenge now is making the government actually implement policies we want. So after the 17 months, with this unity, and by the way, we only got a signature on that contract after we were close to striking. We were ready to go. We had done serious organizing. We had the porta potties ready to go and placed, and we were ready. And finally got that contract signed, apparently in a meeting in the mayor's living room. Mayor Steinberg in his living room brokered the final deal, okay? And then talk about Democratic politicians. For those who don't know, Mayor Steinberg, before he was mayor, he was the California Senate President pro tem. So talk about a good Democrat, right? So he couldn't afford a teacher's strike, I'm assuming. He brokered the deal in his living room, and we averted a strike at the very last minute. And yay, everything was great. But we did go on strike. Yeah. So why did we go on strike? We did go on strike. Now I'm going to go to your lessons and explain in the context of the lessons why we went on strike. Well, in part of that contract were the wage issues that had long plagued our union. We had a very soft wage structure in the middle part of our salary schedule. So mid-career teachers were underpaid in comparison to other districts. So that was fixed in the contract. Everybody got a raise as well. So the wage issues were settled, we thought. But what was really important, at least to a lot of people, myself included, were what some would call the social justice provisions in the contract. We agreed to renegotiate our health care benefits, which have always been kind of the centerpiece of our contract, with the proviso that any savings we could get would go right back to our students. So I teach at McClatchy, the largest high school in the district. Our counselor to student ratio is off the charts high. It's what, I don't know.
We got it lower, remember.
We got it, we're talking one counselor, 400 students, something crazy like that. Okay, we have a nurse, I think we had a nurse 2 days a week this week. There have been many years where we've never had a nurse on campus. So we put in that contract because it was so important to the rank and file and so important to a student population that's 70% low income, that we have more counselors, more nurses, more school psychologists, more school support workers. So any savings that we would get from our healthcare would be rolled right into those things. So that was our contract. We were happy. So that's lesson number one. You have to make it about community needs as well. So we were thrilled about that. I mean, it was a huge win for us and for the kids we serve. Number two, strikes broke the law. Well, ours didn't break the law, but people suggested maybe we were breaking the law. It didn't break the law. Why? Well, because we struck after we had a contract. And apparently, you're not supposed to do that. Well, the reason we did that is because the ink was not even dry. And all of a sudden, you had the superintendent saying that there was no money to implement the contract, that he didn't understand what he was signing when it came to the salary schedule, so he tried to sue us. That was laughed out of court in about 10 minutes. It went to arbitration, and they lost completely in arbitration. So we got our salary schedule. That was great, but they said that the healthcare provisions, in fact, they had to, breach the contract on that because there was no money. The district was in a fiscal crisis, and we were going to have to renegotiate our healthcare benefits so that money could go to solve the district's fiscal crisis. Okay? So there was a back and forth about when we decided that we had to strike to stop the breaching of our contract. There was some back and forth going on about whether this was legal or not. Of course, it was legal. But that idea of were we doing something that was skirting the law was, and we were, the unity, the membership, I've never seen the membership so united. In fact, I think most wanted to stay out for a longer period of time than just one day, okay? And then organizing, I talked about that a little bit. We can talk about that more. And then changing the scarcity narrative. Well, what this district did is they embraced the scarcity narrative. They could not implement our contract. They could not guarantee that $11 million this year that we thought we could get on our health insurance savings could go to kids in the form of counselors, nurses. They couldn't do that because they were in fiscal crisis. That, oh my goodness, the state is going to come in and take over the district. We need to set this aside and solve this horrendous money problem. And people are scratching their heads. The district has more money, more money is coming in and has come in the past 15 years. And this new superintendent that came in, 2 years ago, when he came in, there was a, $5 million, I'm going to get this wrong, there was a surplus, $5 million surplus and $70 million in reserve. What do you mean we're in crisis? And I don't know, some of you may remember what the newspaper headlines and what was, we are about to be taken over. And if the district is taken over, the sky will fall. But I'm still not exactly sure what would have happened any differently, except we wouldn't have had this superintendent. But anyway, but it was crazy. The sky is falling, the takeover is coming. But because of the organizing that was done, because of the unity of our members, and the trust that had really built up from our leadership, we weren't buying it. We weren't buying it. And thanks to the hard work of SCTA, we in fact came to realize that the district was not in this imminent financial crisis, that they had miscalculated how many students are in the district, therefore they had miscalculated how much money is coming in from the state. The Sacramento Bee reported yesterday, you might have seen it, on communications that have now been revealed about the state fiscal auditor telling the district that he had no confidence in their numbers, no confidence in their business office, and all this was happening in the months before our strike. You had these email communications from the state and the district, and in fact the state was saying, you guys don't know what you're doing. That was a faux fiscal crisis, and it was done to generate this idea that the money was scarce and we had to renege on the contract. So where are we now? Well, we won on the salary schedule, so that piece of the contract is intact. Hopefully, when school opens in September, all of us will be getting paid according to the new salary schedule. We were informed this week that that should be the case. The district owes us back pay because that salary schedule should have been in place already. So we're waiting for the back pay. So that piece of it is done. They're still fighting on the healthcare issue and on that money going to social and support services for our kids. The district is still claiming that there's a crisis, and they in fact do not want to implement that piece of our contract. So that fight is still going on. We were told as we were preparing for our walkout, and again, the walkout was about raising the issues that there is a signed contract that the district is breaching. In the most Democrat of democratic cities, the district is breaching a signed contract. We were told, and many have told me, that folks in LA were watching because they had just concluded their strike. And what happens if Sac City is successful in reneging on a contract? They're going to walk away from the very controversial contract in Los Angeles. They said the same thing in Oakland. People all over the country were watching us because you get a contract, you do everything, you organize, you show power, you get a contract that is fair to your profession, fair to your kids, and then you have a district that says, oops, I didn't get it, I didn't understand, or this or that, and they just walk away. It has a lot of precedent for what happens next as more and more of these strikes go forward. It is still stunning to me that we're in this situation. We have a school board who, 7 very nice people, but for some reason do not believe that they have the power to tell this superintendent, get your act together, get this contract implemented, and let's move forward. The school board is, it's just a mystery to me about their unwillingness to use their power as elected officials. And I think that we could talk about a lot of reasons for that, including some who count themselves among, big time resistors to Trump and, the Republicans across the country. So we could talk about why that is, but that at least is at least my take on what's going on. So I would love to have a conversation now with everybody in the audience.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori. So now we're gonna have time for Q&A with Lori and Eric. Just raise your hand and I'll try to take note and get you. Scott, it looks like you're first.
Lori, you did a great job. Couple details I want to add, and but I really commend you on your summation. The district spent $2.3 million on outside legal counsel
Yeah.
to take us to Sacramento Superior Court, only to lose. The case wasn't even closed, and that was how we won the salary part. But the other narrative, and she touched on it, is that we have record funding right now. In the history of this district, they've never had this type of funding because of local control funding. And this is why these battles are being fought in LA, Oakland, and Sacramento. They all have 3 things in common, and those 3 things are common and are high socioeconomic, low socioeconomic, high numbers of low socioeconomic, high numbers of children living in poverty, and English as a second language, and high numbers of students in foster care. Essentially, in 2013, the state of California changed dramatically how they fund schools. So ironically, what we're doing, we're really here, is we have a funding surplus. In 2 months' time, the district's own numbers changed $54 million swing. So, and that's, I'm not making that part up, it sounds like I am, it's like, you're really off 54 million, yeah. And then they were doubling the reserves, and they were paying out $6 million in optional vacation payouts to top brass. And then they were staging, like the night that I spoke at the board, it was like, normally they let teachers speak fairly early because we have a full day. I don't think I spoke till like 9:45 that night, and when your day starts at 7, you can see the point. And they had, they were cutting childcare, not childcare, early childhood development. And what happened was that we had this full frontal attack. It started with the school board and the superintendent, and then it went to the local media, the B, KCRA, and then the mayor, and then the labor groups, and I'm not saying all of them jumped on board, but it was like the first time that I've ever seen where, you know, teachers were like having to justify like what we do. Because the narrative was that we were ruining everything, basically. And so the frustration that I've seen is that in a time of abundance, it became even worse. And so I go back to this district a long ways. I go back to 1970. I was a student, graduated in '83. So I was meeting with one of our previous CTA reps, and he was telling me, he said, Scott, you know, this idea that they're trying to take away your benefits had happened before at a time that the state sent in the most, it was like a giant surplus of money. And so I think it's an ironic problem that we're having here, because it's really not a funding problem, it's a priority problem. And the other part that, and Lori touched on this one, Eric, and I don't know if you know this part, but this year, the district chose to give $11.5 million to a for-profit healthcare company instead of using that money on students. In other words, the teachers could have got the same healthcare that we wanted. And it would basically we would have bought the same car, just at a lower price, but they chose to give that money away to a for-profit company, all the while they're going on TV explaining how broke they are. And that money could have, every single cent of that money would have been used on students. And the last point I'm gonna make is I remember one of our bargaining members was a nurse. And we just wanted to get a little window of her world. And so she talked about the 8 schools that she was at, and she says, I absolutely don't have any time for any medical issues at all. So if a child needs assistance of some sort of medical, I don't have time to do that. I just constantly am testing and evaluating students. So we really have, in this particular case, a priority issue. And it's absolutely disgusting to see the number of administrators, record number of administrators that they've hired, all the while saying the sky's falling. So that's what we've been dealing with.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. I just want to remind everyone, because I'm sure everyone in here knows that we can talk about this stuff for days. Just try to keep things concise, and then maybe we can carry on with one-on-one or group discussions afterwards, a little more unstructured. But thank you, Scott. All right. Tristan had a question next, and then if you just want to raise your hand, I'll put you down, and then you're good to go.
So I was wondering if there was any lessons from the other states in terms of the discussion around pensions. That benefit in particular seems to be a favorite for criticism of the right, and I think a lot of people don't understand what teachers face into retirement as well as classified. And you know, are there any wins out there? Because it seems like the narrative is, why do they get that? I don't. Screw that. I don't care, and I don't want them to protect that versus, wow, that's so great. I wish I had a pension or better place with a pension. Is there any movement in the positive direction in that regard?
Yeah, so the one state where pensions has been really central was Kentucky. I mean, that was actually the main issue there that they struck over, was that the state and the right-wing government was trying to basically dramatically lower their pension, destroy everything they'd been promised just overnight. And the walkouts actually have been successful in forcing that to be defeated. Because of the walkouts, the Attorney General in the state ended up declaring illegal the governor's plan to cut these pensions. So yeah, it was a significant win. I think what you said is right, which is that it can cut both ways. Having good pensions can be seen as like privileged workers, which is actually, it's worth saying that up until recently, that's how a lot of people talked about teachers and public sector workers in general, right? I was like, these are mooches off of everyone else. Like, why do they have all of these benefits? And so that's where I do think the role of like organizers and socialists has to be like, as you mentioned, no, we all deserve this. But that unfortunately hasn't been always the case of unions making that clear, right? Because if unions are only fighting for themselves, then it's not obvious that they are in fact saying this is something that's deserved by everybody. So I think in California, the really exciting thing is that UTLA, which is the Los Angeles Teachers Union, is spearheading a big statewide coalition right now to reform Prop 13 in the 2020 elections. So some of you probably heard about this, but that would bring in billions of dollars, right? This would be a game changer for California politics if you could reform Prop 13, split roll tax. It would be really, this was such a huge battle. I think for pensions in California going ahead, you're gonna have to win that, because otherwise it will be seen as like, working people as a whole pitted against teachers and public sector workers.
Awesome. Alice is next, and then I got you.
Just a quick reminder that both in Kentucky and the state of California, teachers do not pay into Social Security, so we don't get the same retirement benefits that the general public does. I'll try and make this concise because I wanted to point out something that could be an organizing point, which is that we had had a strike as LA had about 20 years earlier. And when I started in the district, there were a number of teachers there, and they had that muscle memory of that. And when you have the muscle memory of it, it makes it easier, but we got out of the practice. And so when we hit a bad patch in the recession, and I think the recession was a big part of what happened in North Carolina and Oklahoma and probably all of those states, that they went over and did something that was just, they did a takeaway from us that they should not have done and should not have gone ahead. And teachers' first response when they did that was not to strike, but, well, can we sue them? They got used to going over and doing things handling things as legal controversies. And it took a while. A lot of the organizing here was getting people out of that mentality that it's like, yeah, we could take this to arbitration, but sometimes it's better to go out on a strike. And I think that that is a lesson that I would say was really important from this one.
Great, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead and then.
So my name's Robin Mushler, and I am not a teacher. I've had the privilege of working with Lori for a couple of years
You're a teacher.
as her instructional aide, so I'm local Title I. So my question is, coming from the position of my union as a classified employee, not a leader in my union, so please don't think I'm representing them right now. But it's two parts, and it's a question for both of you that I want to answer separately, though, from each of you. In past, in these Red for Ed strikes, have all of the unions come together to do this, or has it just been the teachers union that has done this? If they have or have not, how can you speak to the advantages and disadvantages? Specifically to you, Lori, why has that not happened? Can I just leave it at that?
Yeah.
You can elaborate?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't even know, but I'll try the
But
best I
try,
can.
and I definitely, as I said, I'm not a leader in SEIU, so I don't know if there has been any communication. I would not know, so thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Robin, I don't know why. I really don't. There's all sorts of speculation. I think I told you on Facebook, so I can say it publicly. But to me, when the writing was on the wall that something was up when those vacation buyouts came out. For those who don't know, in the midst of the fiscal crisis, when we're gonna be taken over by the state because we're gonna run out of cash, it was announced that the district decided to solve its issue of giving administrators, unlimited, they could accrue unlimited vacation hours that they didn't take. They decided, well, that's a long-term budget drag, so we're gonna solve that problem by writing checks. We're gonna pay out everybody's unused vacation. Principal at my school got an $80,000 check one day. Boom. We have people in the district who got $130,000. This was 200 and some. I mean, I had a teacher at our school, when we announced this, burst out crying. And she said, I can't understand this. And somehow the other labor partners in the district had okayed that. I don't know why that happened.
Was there ever a
I don't know why that happened. And that's something that we're gonna have to really talk to our leadership about what happened there and how can we solve this, because I agree, Robin,
I'm late, yeah.
Robin's laid off because of this crisis. And she is the best instructional aide I've ever worked with. And she's laid off. And I mean, I'm gonna cry myself right now. I don't know why this happened. But it was one of those things, I felt like the district and some people were running a political operation and not running a district.
So
And,
then,
yeah.
to answer the other part, I mean, aren't we stronger together?
Yeah, so that's what I'm
And
talking
what
about.
what has the other,
Yeah, so that's definitely, so one of the reasons the strikes were so big and successful wasn't just that they were broad statewide, but that they overwhelmingly included all workers at a given school. And that's really, really significant. So just to take the
and
example.
how did they do that?
Well, part of it is in a state like West Virginia, nobody has collective bargaining, and so the legal roadblocks to figure out like how you align your contracts, all of that was a little bit easier to overcome because you basically getting your contract was going and fighting at the Capitol. So it was a little bit easier, but it was not that much easier because there was 3 different unions. There was 2 teachers unions and then 1 like service public. Basically support staff is what they called it. And then a lot of them weren't unionized at all. So you had 4 big sectors and in one school, you would have all of them competing for each other. And it was a tremendous division. So actually the first thing that the organizers, Jay and Emily, did, the very first thing they did was create this Facebook group on the idea that this is for all school workers. It's actually for all public employees. But their idea was that at a given school, we had to break out of this division between the different unions. That was their starting point. And so what they did is they started holding meetings for open to everyone, whether you were union or not, because some people weren't in the union, or whether you were a teacher or not. And that model is really what spread, and it ended up being the strike votes were of all workers at a school, and it made it really important for them to win. And it's just worth saying that wasn't just red states though. In Oakland, they did a very similar thing. A lot of the support staff, they didn't cross the picket line in Oakland. And I think that the reason for that is if your orientation as a union is primarily towards lobbying the district rather than building power, then you're going to actually not really care if you sell out other people, right? Because you're trying to actually jockey, right? And you're not going to think that you're going to need solidarity from other workers because you're not planning on going on strike anyway. So you're just going to try to get in the back room door. But from the second your starting point as a union is like, yeah, we need power, then that means you need allies. And so it's, that's what solidarity is all about. So I do think that raises the question of like how we transform our unions to make it so that we don't just complain afterwards when they do bad things, but we can prevent them from doing that, right? And that requires a lot of organizing from below it.
Perfect, thanks Eric. So
great.
we've got time for a couple more questions, concise questions. I'm gonna get to folks who haven't spoke yet, if possible. You right there, yeah.
Yeah, so my question goes back to the bee story, and I think probably maybe Lori could answer this. But in the bee story, it leaves it out there as we know Jesse Ryan was well aware of this, and the superintendent was well aware, but maybe some of the other very nice school board members didn't know about this communication because it was after this communication with the auditor that the school board unanimously voted an outstanding review of our superintendent. Right? So my question is do we know any more about which of our outstanding school board members were aware of this prior, or?
So I wrote an email to all of them about 3 weeks ago asking when did they know that the count was off, for example, when did they, and I've received no answer from anybody. But if some of us were talking before we started today. If I was a school board member who was not privy to that, I'd be furious. But nobody is saying anything.
Lori, can you explain what the background of that was?
So we went on strike in April, the early part of April, and again, up until that point, crisis. Well, emails started, which the B has copies of now. But emails started between the state auditor, who would be, if the state actually came in and took over, he would be the one kind of leading that. Emails were discovered through public records requests that he started talking to the district way back in, I think it was earlier than February, I could be wrong, but at least in February, March, that he had no confidence in their business office, he had no confidence in their numbers. The revelation that the student count was off, therefore the amount of money that the district was getting from the state was seriously off to the tune of millions of dollars. All of that was known before we went on strike, but it was closely held by the superintendent, at least that is the perception from the B, that it was held by the superintendent and the board president, and not shared with the other board members.
Okay, perfect. We've got time for 2 more questions. You can go in the striped shirt, and then we'll round it out with Sam right there in the black hat.
This is for Lori. Isn't the charters, aren't the charter school, the independent charter schools a drain from district funds? And was there any attempt in your negotiation to at least put a check against the establishment of any new charters? And that's one question. And maybe even threaten to demand that all charters, independent charters, be returned to full public control. That's it. And the question that comes out of it is that sometimes, especially under a neoliberal regime like we've been under since 2008, this district, and throughout the country, it doesn't matter whether Democrat or Republican is in power. Maybe it's time to be audacious and to ask for what. Well, to ask just for what for returns of public education is not audacious. It's only audacious under these circumstances. Maybe more audacity is required.
Yeah.
That, of course, depends on the solidarity
Right.
of the members here. That's
So there's state charter law that, if a charter is denied at a school district level, then charters have the ability to go to the county, they can go to the state, they can get their charter approved, and they almost always are at that level. And that's a big problem, and I know that there are bills in the hopper, that this is a big issue this year in the legislature. I have not been following them, so Alice has maybe, but these are, okay, so these are, statewide because it is state law. That said, my dream would be a school board member who would actually deny a charter and just tell the state, you guys do it, because we're not going to. And but we don't have that. They believe, well, the state will come in and do it, and so you're right. I mean, we need to demand more. We absolutely need to demand more on this while we're waiting for whatever happens to get the capacity we need to change state law. SCTA also unionized the teachers at Sacramento Charter High School this past year.
Good job.
That has been, well, but probably not surprising. I think most of the teachers who led that and who signed up early and all, they're gone. They're gone. So the difficulties of doing that are, it's incredible. And in the California Charter School Industries Association is now one of the biggest players in politics here in California. And they, because it's a blue state, most of their money goes to Democrats, and we have to accept that is a reality. But I agree with you. We do need to get more audacious on that. And I'm a veteran of the Sac High struggle. My son went to Sac High. And there were, I agree.
Can I add to that? At this moment, I think, to be really specific, I think you're right. It's a very good time to be bold and audacious. But I think that is concretized in the demand for a moratorium on charter schools, statewide and nationally. And that's very important because most of the teachers unions statewide and on a national level are not calling for that. They're hedging on it, in part because the Democratic Party still at this point is very reluctant to. The Democrats, there's more charters passed under the Obama administration than before or since, right? And I think then that our responsibility from below and for the teachers unions like UTLA or elsewhere, and then hopefully rank and file teachers as well, is be like, no, now's the time. The charters, the tide is turning against it, but we're gonna have to like seize the moment right now. I mean, Bernie Sanders right now is nationally the only Democratic candidate who's saying for a moratorium on charter schools. We should demand every single politician who's running for president should say that for a moratorium on charter schools. And statewide, it's insane. The Democrats still have a supermajority, right? In the legislature. How is it possible that this Democrat is still not talking and putting into action a moratorium on charter schools? It's like, this is a really good time to push on that hard and, make the people who say they're with us actually prove it in practice.
Well, and we always talk about the Koch brothers, right? We need to be talking about Reed Hastings. Because he's our Koch brother here in California, and his role and the money he gives and how he subsidizes the California charter schools in his association,
Thanks, Lori. And then we'll go to Sam for our last question.
Okay, so this question's for Eric. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the role that socialists have played, both inside the unions and outside the unions, whether it's supporting the teacher strike.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So as I mentioned, the strike wave in its current form since 2018 began because two members of Democratic Socialists of America started organizing, right? And so this is significant. It means that for the first time in generations, you do have the reconnection of organized socialists with the labor movement, and it's a very explosive mix. That's why in the 50s they tried kicking us all out of the unions, right? Because it was Reds who actually were good. It's true. It's like that's why they tried to kick the Reds out, because it's like we have generally in the past and still tend to be at the really good organizers and understand that the only way you win is by organizing against those in power, not begging them. It wasn't just West Virginia though. In Arizona, can you imagine Arizona? It's like deep red. It was led by socialists again, young people who were politicized by the Bernie Sanders campaign, and it became a big issue. If any of you followed the Arizona strike, the red baiting of the Arizona strike leaders was like front page news. They were always trying to get these quotes and citing Marx. It was like Fox News type stuff, right? In Arizona every day. But it was funny because it didn't really catch. Because part of it is that teachers were inoculated against the media by this time because the media just kept on lying about what's happening in the schools. They kept on saying that the teachers were doing well. People were like, by this time they're just like, everything that the media says is probably a lie. So it's like, why should we trust them on this and anything else? And my favorite thing that happened by the end of the strike, there was an article written by somebody, because the red baiting was a big story, who looked into it from the main newspaper, did an investigation, and they determined that in fact DSA was not manipulating and in charge of the strike, which was true, because these are socialists who weren't even in DSA yet. But then the article concludes, it says, well, it turns out socialism might not be so bad if it means that we have education, healthcare for all. It's like, why not? Right? So I do think that ultimately the red baiting has been counterproductive. And then just the last thing as far as the role of socialists, it hasn't just been as strike leaders. LA was as well, socialists played an important role, but it's also been as supporters from outside. I think that's important for us. Just to keep in mind is that DSA chapters have played a central role in almost every single one of the strikes in organizing strike support, raising the funds. Particularly in 2018, the national teachers unions were MIA, so it was often DSA and other socialists had to raise the funds. That's what I spent a lot of my time doing, helping raise the funds for, so people could have food at the picket lines, or even a strike fund in general. And Oakland, I think, was the best example, where they raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for Bread for Ed, where the DSA chapter was the partner of the union, and basically helped feed the strike and organize dozens of solidarity schools so that students wouldn't have to, who had nowhere else to go, would have somewhere to go. I think really ultimately that this DSA, it's very important that we think about anytime, not just teachers, anytime any workers on strike, our role as socialists is to be there and be the best strike supporters that we can. And so hopefully, keep your eye out. Whenever you hear there's a strike or a union organizing effort, I think it's incumbent on us to be there and show solidarity. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Sac DSA was there supporting us, and it was great to be on a picket line with Sac DSA members. It's why I joined Sac DSA.
All right, thank you everyone for your time. one more round of applause to Lori and Eric. For Sac DSA co-chair Jonah for videotaping the event. Keep your eyes peeled, share it widely. And to John and SCTA for hosting us tonight. So please go to the back, get DSA literature, buy Eric's book. I know I'll be sticking around. I'm sure some of your other socialists sitting next to you will. Talk to us. If you want to come sign up, you can use my laptop or go to your phone, dsausa.org/join. Thank you everyone for coming.
You got the number.
Yeah, so it's